Hello, and welcome to a continuing series of legislative candidate interviews brought to you by Bresnan Communications, the Montana Cable Television Communications Association, and MCAT, your hometown access channel. I have with me this morning, might not be morning when you watch the program, the Democratic candidate for House District 93 in Missoula, Dick Barrett. Dick, welcome.
Thanks.
Dick's opponent, the Republican candidate, Steve Dogiakis, could not be with us. So Dick will have an opportunity to visit, sort of informally. And I'd like to take that opportunity and, first of all, have you tell these folks in Missoula you hope to vote for you a little about your background.
Okay. I am a retired professor of economics at the University of Montana. I came to the university in 1970 and retired a year ago. And over that time I was active in lots of both public affairs and research associated with policy issues, economic issues, conservation issues, labor issues in Montana. So that's my professional background. I have been a member of the boards of directors of a number of organizations here in Missoula: Planned Parenthood, Montana Conservation Association, Montana Conservation Voters, the Food Bank, a number of others. So I've been actively involved in the community and in politics and in academics associated with public policy for a long time. And I decided to run because I've always had those commitments and interests and thought it would be a good way to use my retirement.
Well, we're appreciative of all the efforts of all the candidates to use whatever time they have to serve the rest of us. I'd be interested, I've asked this question to most of the candidates, but I've not yet talked to an economist. Obviously, the subject on everybody's mind of late is the economic meltdown at the federal level. Yet, as we walk down the streets of Missoula, do we see it? Are we feeling it? And rather than have me give an opinion, I'd like to know, particularly in terms of your service at the Montana legislature, are we going to get the effects of this national meltdown? If so, what can we do to help ourselves survive it? And if not, what can we do to help ourselves stay out of it?
Okay. It's a complicated question, as you know. The good news, I think, for Montana in the current situation is that our financial institutions have been more kind of conservatively and intelligently managed than many of the financial institutions that are failing all around the country. So just today in the Missoulian, we saw an article that said that really things there is no crisis in, for example, in Montana banking. And that's a good thing. And there's no obvious shutting down of credit for mainstream businesses, for building, for consumers. That's occurring in Montana. So that's a good thing, and I think that'll probably continue to be the case. Other states around the nation are going to not find that to be the case. They're going to see employment and activity in the financial and services industry really drastically affected, apparently. Of course, the underlying cause of this particular crisis is the collapse of real estate prices around the country. And again, I think Montana is not in quite such a bad position as the rest of the country in that regard. There's a lot of empty houses out there in much of the United States, foreclosures taking place, a glut of houses on the market. In that situation, you don't get new homes being built. So the construction industry is very badly affected. So again, in Montana, I don't think that some of that is happening, but nowhere near to the extent that it's happening elsewhere. So those are the kind of silver linings. The real imponderable and the difficulty is whether or not the national economy takes a nosedive. If it does, Montana will get dragged down along with it. Maybe we'll be in a better position than other states as we were during the 2001 recession. But that's the $64 question, I think, Mark.
Just to continue on that subject, are there things you as a candidate want to stress in terms of either sustaining or developing Montana's economy? Any particular sectors you think need to be incentivized, refreshed, explored, de-taxed, more taxed?
Two things. First of all, I don't think that we can. If there's a national recession, Montana is going to have to ride it out with everyone else, and I don't think that the long-term growth and prosperity of Montana's economy. I think we have to separate the long-term growth of Montana's economy from and prosperity from the issue of a recession. In terms of what kinds of strategies that I like to see happen, I believe that what government should do is sort of establish the environment in which economic vitality can flourish. And I believe that there are a couple of things that are very important in that regard. One is continuing funding of education, particularly higher education. I believe for a community like Missoula, the health of the university and the university system for the state is of great importance in providing for economic progress. And I also believe that continuing health of our environment is an important attractant for businesses and workers who want to make the economy work.
Speaking of education funding, do we fund it enough? And if we don't, where do we get the funds to upgrade it to the level that you think it would need?
Do we fund it enough? When we talk about higher education, probably in both regards. When we talk about higher education, I think that we have been defunding it in the sense that we have increasingly relied on tuition revenue to fund higher education or federal grant money to fund higher education, and relied less on state funding. And that has made education less affordable, less accessible, and so I would say in that regard, no, we probably don't fund it enough. With respect to K-12 education, that is primary and secondary education, I think that the funding issue there is not just how much funding we have in general, but also where the funding comes from. What we've done there is come to rely quite a bit on property taxes and less on general state funding. And that's an imbalance that we began to redress in the last session, and I think that we need to continue to redress it in this session. Where's the money going to come from? That's a big question. And our ability to meet any of these things, any of these goals in terms of funding education is going to depend on the state of the budget in general. And that, in turn, of course, is going to depend on the answer to the last question you asked me, which is what's going to happen to the economy? Because the big thing driving the economy, the state's budget is the state of the economy and how fast it can grow and what kind of revenues it can produce for government.
Is it it seems to me that economics has always been a balancing act, of which I'm glad I'm not responsible.
Yes.
But the irony, well, thank you. You must remember me as a student. The irony to me right now is that the surplus that we have, which was yesterday, I believe, estimated to be about $300 million, a large portion of it comes from increased prices for natural gas and for oil, which of course increased prices have bedeviled the average consumer,
Correct.
but fattened the Montana coffers.
Correct.
Do you have any, if we are able to sustain that surplus going into this January, would you have any priorities for it as an economist of late? Would you, would we refund some of it? Would we reinvest it? Would some of it go for this education upgrade? I mean, how would you divvy up the 300? How much of it would be saved? How much would be invested? How much would be rebated? And is it enough for what Montana needs? Let's assume there is 300 the day you walk in the door in January.
Well, there may be 300 the day you walk in the door, but, and by the way, when I agreed about economics being a balancing act and that you were glad that you didn't have to do it, I meant that
you too.
Economics
You too, yeah.
is indeed a balancing act. So of course, some people say it's on the one hand this and on the other hand that. The economists never reach a conclusion, and I hope to avoid that here. But to get back to the $300 million. $300 million, we will walk in the door perhaps with $300 million. The problem will be, of course, that it's not likely that the conditions that produce that surplus are going to be coming up again in the next biennium. So some of that $300 million is going to have to go just to meeting the ongoing needs of state government. But there still might be money left over. That is to say, once the normal expenditures that the state has to make just to keep things going and to meet the inflation and costs and so forth. Once those things are met, there will still be some money to spend in a discretionary way. I would place a relatively high priority on, first of all, again, increasing the state's participation in higher education so that we could continue to freeze tuition. I think that's an important goal, so that we can bring the share of tuition in the funding of the university system down a little bit and make higher education a little more affordable. I believe that we should, we not only should, but probably must increase state funding for K-12 education because of court cases, among other things. I believe that there will be some, that if the initiative that's on the ballot that passes regarding extending chip coverage, there will have some money have to go into that. If financial markets go south, there may be a need to put more money into the state retirement funds because their unfunded liability will increase. And then there's also direct property tax relief in the form of a rebate. So those are all potential targets for any loose change that might be in the budget.
We've had surpluses 2 sessions ago, somewhere between $1.3 billion and $1.6 billion, and then we're fortunate enough to have a much less of a surplus this time, but still a surplus. Cities say, to a large extent, they have not benefited from the good times that the state has enjoyed, that it has not trickled down, and they have obligations and infrastructure needs and day-to-day administrative needs that they can't meet. And what they are wanting to do, a coalition of some of the larger cities, is bring to the legislature a proposal to give them the same local option taxing authority that is now limited to true quote-unquote resort communities.
Correct.
And you're familiar with that.
Yes.
And I understand that Mayor Missoula favors it. Do you favor it?
I do. I mean, options are always good in that regard. It's hard to argue that cities shouldn't have the option to be able to do more to raise revenue. But I would be cautious about it. I mean, I would urge cities to be cautious about it for this reason, and that is that in resort communities, it's possible for example, a sales tax. It's possible to use a sales tax to actually share the cost of government with the tourists and the visitors who are making use of the public facilities in that city, and who are buying meals and going to motels and getting entertainment and so forth. When it comes to other kinds of localities, particularly localities where there isn't a relatively captive group of tourists there, the difficulty with the local option, for example, a local option sales tax, is that people may simply shop out of town. Consider Missoula. If the city of Missoula wanted to have a local option sales tax, that might have the effect of driving customers into outlying areas where outside of the city. So cities have to think carefully about the implications of imposing a local option sales tax.
But you would give them the right to make those decisions.
I would give them the right to. I would give them the right to make that decision. But I would think that they would need to think carefully about how well it was going to work and how they were going to apply it.
We've got a couple minutes left. I'd like to continue to visit with you, but we've got candidates stacked up all day long, and want to get them all get a chance to present themselves. But I'd like to give you an opportunity to close. I gave these overarching themes for you to discuss, but I didn't mean to limit you from things that might be near and dear to your heart if you're elected, something that you might be specifically interested in that isn't to do with the economy, something you're either proposing to take or know of that you want to support. And so I'd give you a chance to talk about specifics, the goals when you go to Helena, and also, a final request for the voters to send you to Helena. So I thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned this before, but I think that the real basis of healthy economy and healthy communities, that the real public basis, the real private basis of a healthy community is, of course, is the people who work and who take care of their neighbors and who provide for themselves, and all of that is, of course, at the very heart of creating a healthy and prosperous community. But from the point of view of what the public can do, what the public's contribution or the government's contribution to that, I believe very strongly that maintaining a high-quality educational system and helping and a high-quality environment are two of the roles that government should emphasize. And in the area of environment, I think in particular what Montana has to look forward to is the fact that whether we like it or not, there's going to be a transition in the American economy and in the global economy away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy, towards conservation. And we need to start making that move aggressively. I think the sooner we get going and the more aggressive we are about it, the better positioned we are both to absorb the burden of making that transition and also to lead that transition. So I believe that is something that we need to work on, and I believe that it is something that we have not done necessarily a very good job at yet. Why should you vote for me? I would hope you'd vote for me because I believe that I bring a lot of experience and professional expertise to the table and a commitment to work on issues that are important to everybody in Montana.
Well, on behalf of Bresnan and the Montana Cable Telecommunications Association and MCAT and the citizens of Missoula, thank you for being here, sharing your thoughts. Thank you for taking the time to campaign. And then if you were elected, thank you for taking 1,000% more time to actually serve. So, and the least we can do as citizens, and I would encourage you, the viewers, to do, is to vote for the candidate of your choice. Again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.